Hey everybody, as you can see, we are at the whiteboard here, and we're talking about our crash-proof conditioning side of things. And just to touch on what crash-proof means to us is our resilient, durable, literally able to handle a crash better, but ideally preventing that. And there is actually quite a bit of good research and information, anecdotal evidence that hopefully this is common sense, but the more conditioned you are, meaning VO2 max, you're able to handle that work capacity, you have that power endurance, all those key elements. Body weight matters, so someone who can handle that is going to be at lower risk for injury regardless, and obviously has all the other characteristics built into that as much as possible too. But the more specific the activity, and again, hopefully this is common sense, so somebody who wants to get good at snowboarding to a point, they have to actually go snowboarding and work on those pieces. They can't just go do squats. Say that they're out there learning to snowboard and their legs are just burning like crazy, so they're like, I gotta do some more squats, more lunges, more conditioning. Yes, as you can see down here in our top picks, we do have lunges on there, but really a mistake if they're not getting their base overall conditioning, their engine going. On the other extreme, they may be totally out of breath because they're not conditioned for snowboarding. There's a lot of just intensity, stress going on in their body and mind. Everything's working really hard, and they're not used to that. They don't have the efficiency, the economy of that motion. There's a good example of somebody, elite cyclist like Lance Armstrong, going and doing triathlon. He's still a good triathlete all around from what I've read and understand too, but he's not an elite. He's never going to be elite at that. And even more extreme for things like swimming, or the more coordinated the pattern is, the more like it is. And somebody who's just doing swimming would not make the most sense for someone who wants to be an all mountain skier, snowboarder, backcountry hunter. We're going to be going up ridges. We're going to be up in this extreme weather. So we want to go and do the closest thing to that activity that still is fitting in these principles. So to touch on those principles, the first one, common sense one, some people won't like me for this, but I'm going to say machines. No machines doesn't mean never do machines. It just means very carefully consistency. A cyclist, for example, or somebody who's on the ski erg or something like that, that's wanting to train again for more backcountry skiing, snowboarding, let alone having the machine. They gotta enjoy using the machine. It's not as specific as it could be. It's not as coordinated, especially on more of the ASSult bike type of patterns and that too. It's a repetitive stress, repetitive overload there too. And it doesn't have as much full body juice, full body neurological juice to it. And that, on the other extreme, is the gait and ambulation, something that's ambulatory, moving our body forward or backwards in space, basically. It really takes a lot of neurological juice. It takes everything to do it. Sprinting would be the highest level there. If we did it in intervals, we wouldn't choose sprinting. It doesn't even make our top picks for true conditioning in this lens, but some level of sprinting would be a great adjunct to that too. But we want to ration that, do it in more intervals rather than finding this. And again, is it safe? Is sprinting safe to just start out doing for conditioning? Absolutely not. Is running? Yeah, not really for a lot of people. On the treadmill, it's fine, but it's not as specific. Could be something where you're going up an incline. That's a fair choice, and yeah, that would be a machine. So we could talk about all those scenarios all day long, but yeah, does it generally fit that area? Is it simple enough? Sometimes people like CrossFitters in traditional CrossFit, and I think that's a big reason why stuff like High Rocks is taking over coming up too, it's simple enough for them. It's more potentially more scalable. So a lot of CrossFitters would argue that and say, yes, it is scalable. I can use 20 pounds to do barbell snatches. But I would say, why are we bothering to try to teach that or do that motion when the injury risk, the just intensity, or the coordination components are just overwhelming for a lot of people? So that's where I would choose, instead of a barbell snatch or a barbell clean or something, I would choose a kettlebell swing. Much easier to teach. It's safe, effective. I can get the full body involved in this too, and very much scale. I can choose that rest period. I can't train, and we'll get into this in a second too, if I'm trying to go the long, slow duration cardio, we call it LSD sometimes, is the more zone 2 type of stuff, and that would be more where I would choose, the rucking, or somebody who's very deconditioned might just be walking or using, we call nature's intervals, going up and down just some gradual type of hills, or maybe I'm hiking up, locally we have Pilot Butte here, which is, what is it, about a little under a mile up, I think, and it goes up 700 feet in elevation. So that's a nice conditioning. You could pace that, pacing that out, listening to our body, not getting extremely short of breath with any of this. I'd much rather stay on that side of things, not get into that acidic soup that most of these other programs kind of chase. If we're doing boot camp training or something along those lines, or high rocks, again, CrossFit, I'm just picking on all of them, I guess, too. They tend to have all the other elements. Doesn't mean we can't do circuits, doesn't mean high rocks is necessarily bad, but is it the best to get crash proof? Is it the best for our, say, winter activities is our theme that we're really gunning towards? It's not. It's going to be a generalized area, and that's generally what it's for. That's what people are using it for. They want to up their general physical preparedness, their capacity in the more conditioning, or in the work capacity, whatever you want to call this. It's got all these different names for usually the same general idea. You don't want to be out of breath. Worst case, you don't want to be out of breath walking up a flight of stairs kind of thing too. I think that's an easy place to shoot for. You want that ability to move well through space and not be breathing hard doing it. So again, considering all that, we're going to filter through these areas and give you a little explanation why now. So these aren't necessarily in order, but I could easily say for me, rucking, just to flesh that out a little bit, is not military grade rucking. That is oftentimes loading too heavy and or trying to move too fast. So we're going to move slow and load it about 10% of our body weight max for most people to start, and then in small doses we'll only go a little bit above that. So I'd rather see the low and slow usually go in longer durations, like an hour, or maybe depending what they're getting ready for, but we're talking kind of more overall health and the crash proofing, our overall conditioning, upping that ability, just so functional, for a lack of a better word. That word's kind of worn out in our industry, but it truly is that functioner. For me, say as a backcountry hunter, having that pack on, having something weighted, or I'll do a combo of different things. We have programs like the kettlebell mile are great. That's more this weighted carry in the more inner, like a mid-range kind of area, and that would be great to consider training too. But I like rucking for that longer duration stuff, and we could do the rest of these would really be more interval-based kind of things too. We can work up to something where we do push into that more acidic, feel the burn kind of stuff, to being so short of breath. That can work our mind as much as our body and push to that edge. But generally, I'd rather prepare for it in the gym, do the safe, steady stuff that fits in here, and then go push it out there somewhat. You can ration that or make sure you're prepared in some ways, but save that for those big days. And then even, decide what that's worth to you, depending on how old you are, how much you're willing to risk it there. It's a bit of a gamble, or a bit of a consideration. What are you willing to put on the line for that? So hopefully that makes sense. Again, getting into kettlebells, I prefer that over a barbell because it just is so rhythmic in nature. We have that weight generally coming back between our legs, and it just wants to propel out. We're using these big muscle groups. That's another key. We could put that in principles too. Key muscles. It's simple enough to learn. Most people are totally fine, just variations of swings. We could go into, say, a kettlebell snatch. That's really the end of the line. Maybe it's a different, like long cycle jerks, or kettlebell, different chains of movements, or different compounds. That can be a great conditioning option too. Generally, I like the more Pavel-esque strong first tools of just simple one main exercise, maybe two max. They could pair nicely with something like crawling, which we'll touch on here a little bit next. Crawling, this is inspired and influenced by my friend and mentor Tim Anderson. Asked him that a couple years ago, what would he choose for his zombie apocalypse, recruiting tool or whatever. He said crawling, off the knees, good posture. It's not just a lazy bear crawl. That The hips should be minimally moving, head is above the hips kind of thing. Good quality crawl, and I prefer like all different directions. That person has a very strong mind if they can crawl for that full, Tim says, that full 20 minutes. We have on our empowered standards, we have a 10-minute crawl test. I have managed to do that one. I have not done the longer version. Tim has even crawled a full mile. But again, that person just through that, doing that thing, they just have such a great expansive capacity to do so many things well. Their core is firing well, their gait, they're very coordinated, they're lightweight, they don't carry a bunch of extra bulky, body weight. It's just working authentically there. Upper and low body is both having to work together, where these other areas really focus on the lower body. They're not so upper body oriented, which again, depends on what your goal, what you're working towards for that activity. And say, skiing and snowboarding would be the focus in this lens, but applies to everything. All these principles should apply to everything. So again, I could talk all day about the value of crawling. There's tons of other information. Check out Tim's stuff on that too. He's done a lot over the years with that. Lunges and step ups. That's again more strong first emphasis. The lunging and stepping up, having to come up and down is much more focused on like going up a vertical element to coming up a ridge, or backcountry hiking, any of that stuff. Ideally doing some of this, like we're at about 3,500 feet, so that's better if you can get up at elevation and be able to train this. Not always practical, or rucking, getting up in some higher elevations to potentially train that, condition that. There's some other tools you can use with that, but these would be more longer durations, or some of, again, like Pavel has a good lunge program that I've done that is up to 2 minutes of lunges, but he has this nice system in his kettlebell axe program, and just tools that I have used that are pretty common sense. He has these stop signs that you can look at for that. There's a lot of common sense of not going into this high, again, burning, where we're losing coordination with this. So with this type of stuff, we can regulate that. We can scale it a bit by, again, adding weight. We can slow down our pace. We could potentially not go as low into like a deep lunge, not go up a hill. That's the basic protocol in there. And some of that longer duration stuff to kind of fill in that gaps is nice, where the kettlebell swings, we will do as little as, or a carry or something like that, weighted carries. We'll do that as little as like 15 seconds and load that in the moderate high area. But again, if we can get a little greedy and train for power and train for even some bits of strength, or kind of maintaining our strength within this, having this, we say manly cardio in a sense is kettlebell work. Why not borrow from those areas if it's going to have a big carry or big capacity for things? And again, the step up, that just makes a lot of sense. We're stepping up and down on a box. We're having to really, like, we're walking up a real steep grade. And if we can do a step up, kind of over engineer that, take a big long step, doing shorter steps is only going to get easier with that too. So, tons of value there. So hopefully that gives you guys a nice context, a nice filtration for these choices. And please ask questions. Happy to explain more, flesh this out. Love a healthy kind of camaraderie communication with this stuff too. So again, crash proof conditioning, there you have it.